Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hi, hello, my name is Fiorian Gisti. I'm from English Educational Department of Maritim Haji University. So, last week we have a talk, or I'll already show you the media that I've created for teaching and speaking. And for this week, I will show you another media for teaching and reading. The media that I've created now for teaching and reading almost look like the media for teaching and speaking like last week. It looked like this. But uh, we play different this time because it's for reading. Um, yeah, and I will show you how it works. Okay, first of all, we have reading skills. So, for any readers or people who like to read, for any readers or people who like to read, you have to able to have this reading skill. It has 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 13 14 15 and 16 reading skills that a reader should have. First of all, use a background knowledge. So when we read, we have to acknowledge the background or the story or book that we want to read. And the next one is identify the author purpose. Every book or every story that being created must have a purpose. The writers or the authors who create the story have a purpose on it. And then ask question. What kind of question that we should ask before reading, like what this story is going to be about, what is the purpose of this story. Should be the last one, but I kind of make it wrong order of it. You reading a story or a book, you must have a conclusion or conclusion in your head, right? Like, oh, that's why this is happened, that's why the story is created. Next is recognize the sequence. Every story must have a time order or set of time of the story. For example, like it happened seven years ago and then it's back into the future, or there's also some kind of story that going back and forth through the past and the future time and the present time. So based on that, we have to recognize the sequence of the story that will make sense to us, to the readers, whoever read it. And then recognize cause and effect. In every story must have problems or purpose or something that evaluate the story much better. So it must have cause and effect. Why does the story happen, or why does the accident in the story happening? And then visualize. For anyone who ever read something, a novel, more for or a fairy tale, they must have imagination on their own. For example, if I reading a Snow White, I'm I'm imagine it to be a beautiful young woman, or my friend it's visualized as an artist, but also some people recognize them as people who are close to them. So this is it's more like our own movie in our imagination, right? Like a producer who make the story from a book or from a novel have their own imagination based on the book, but what they created and what we imagine must be so different. Like, this is not what I imagined. So I think like some people more like to read the book by themselves than watch the movie because it's more interesting to imaginary by ourselves. After we read the story or uh, visualize the story in our head, we must have already have the summarize of the story in our head, not like the whole story like complete book or a story that we read, but we are remember the important parts of the story. The next one is recognize, compare and contrast. We have to be able like recognize the compare and contrast of the story that we read. And the next one, identify the main idea. Identify the main idea of the story. For example, like not the title, but the point of this story. For example, if the story is about Cinderella, what is the main idea of the story that we have to find. The next one is find fact and details of the story. For example, most of the story sometimes is based on a true story, right? For example, personal narrative story we can create by ourselves and then make prediction. In the middle of story, we sometimes already knew or sometimes we don't know, but sometimes we already have a prediction how it ends. And the next one is adjust your pacing. This is really important because whenever we read, we have to make target of how fast do we read a story or a book. The next one is distinguish between fact and opinion. This is also important when we read a story. So later after we read it, we can make a difference between does this affect or opinion. And the next one is make connection. Do we able to connect it with the story that we read, or does it make sense for us? And reread for clarity, and this is also important if you want to understand more about the story. We don't have to dominate or master all of these reading skills, but we can start by learning one by one. Even though some of these reading skills we have already understand by our own. For example, visualize, like what I said before, we sometimes imagining or making our own movie based what are we reading in our head or imagine it by ourselves. And summarize, we already know what happened in the story, even though not whole the story that we can explain to other people, but we can summarize by explaining the important thing of the story. We cannot dominate or master all of this, but this can help us to be a better reader, which is close reading. This is have 3 steps of close reading. Let's open it so we can understand how to be a better reader. Okay, can you see it? First is read to get the general idea. Second is highlight the important part. This is also the part of summarized stories. Mark anything else you notice using close reading symbols. And then talk what is this text about or what it is the story about. That's step 1, how to be a close reader in close reading. Step 2 is, can you see it? Okay. Read the second time more closely. This is important if you want to understand the story more. For example, maybe you don't understand the beginning of the story or the end. Circle parts you don't understand and mark anything else you notice. Maybe same like step 1, but this is the part that you don't understand. The third one is explain the mark you made. Why did the authors write this text? Okay, step 3. Look at the question. This already create the question for each story. The second one is reread to find the answers. After you read all the story, you can look at this question that I've made and you can reread to find the answer of the question. And then last one is write your answer. Mark the text to show where you found them. You can either write them or just mark them in the book or the text that you read. After you read all the story, I already create some of question for you to answer what is the story, what is your story about, or what story that you read about. You can see it. Now I will read one by one of the question, okay? What is the story about? What is the problem in the story? How does the problem get solved? Explain about the main character in the story. What is the setting of the story? What is the genre of the story? For example, maybe you're reading fairy tale, horror, or legends story. What was the purpose of the story? Every story must have purpose or a moral value. Oh, this is the last one is what is the moral value of the story? So moral value and purpose is kind of different. You have to explain what the purpose of the story and what moral value or what can you learn from the story. And then after you answer all of this question, you can choose a reading activity. Choose a reading activity to do when you are finished with all your reading work. For example, right here, you can write a letter to the author telling them what you like and dislike about the story. And then you can make a word hunt or a crossword puzzle using the words in the story. The next one is you can draw a picture or make a mural of the story. Make sure the character settings and main idea are all in one picture. You can also make a mini book of the story, fold some pages to form a book and staple the edges together. You can write the summary of the story or the important part of the story in a mini book. And the last one is draw your favorite part or characters from the story and reason why you like it. Yeah, after you read, you can answer a question and also you can do the reading activity right here. And this is only for, I already collect a few narrative text or narrative story that we can discuss together. We can discuss them in group or individuals. For example, Snow White. And also Malin Kundang, a legend story. And then Kancil and Crocodile. This is a fable story where animal can act like human, like talking. Or if you're confused to choose a story, I can choose it for you from this part. Choose a story. And then you can read them. You can improve your reading skill through this board, and then you can follow how to be a close reader by the close reading. So I already have 3 steps. I think that's all for me. That's all for the media that I have created. Most likely it look like the last week media, but it's a different way I created because it doesn't have spinning wheels, but it still look interesting, doesn't it? Okay, I think that's all from me. Thank you for watching. I guess I see you next week for another media, which is teaching and writing. See you next week. Bye.